ITV Net.
Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. Pope Leo has taken his first public step to address clergy sexual abuse by appointing French Archbishop Thibault Verny as president of the Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors. Verny has vowed to strengthen the church's safeguarding measures amid global scandals. Hamas says it is ready to begin U.S.-sponsored Gaza ceasefire talks immediately as Israel's Security Cabinet prepares to meet Saturday evening to decide its response, according to media reports. Gaza Humanitarian Foundation says 2 of U.S. aid workers were injured in a grenade attack at a food distribution site in Gaza, but now are in stable condition. According to media reports, Gaza officials have added that Israeli strikes have killed 23 near aid sites. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has urged U.S. President Donald Trump to intervene to stop the shootings at Gaza aid centers, which the UN says have killed over 500 people, according to local media reports. A U.S. judge in Boston cleared the deportation of 8 migrants to South Sudan on Friday, rejecting claims it was unconstitutional as per reports. The men are scheduled to be flown out after the Supreme Court overturned a lower court's order blocking their removal. France has opened the River Seine for public swimming today for the first time since 1923 after a major cleanup. According to media reports, 3 sites will host over 1,000 swimmers daily until 31st of August ahead of the Paris Olympics. At least 24 people were killed in flash floods along Texas Guadalupe River, with 23 to 25 girls from a summer camp still missing, according to local reports, forcing cancellations of July 4th fireworks and triggering massive rescue operations. Liverpool and Portugal star Diogo Jota, 28, and his brother Andre Silva, 25, were laid to rest today in Gondomar, Portugal, after dying in a car crash in Spain just days after Jota's wedding, according to media reports. Malaysia is taking a tough stance on dumped imports, imposing provisional anti-dumping duties ranging from 3.86 to 57.90% on galvanized iron and steel products coming from China, South Korea, and Vietnam. The duties announced by the Ministry of Investment, Trade and Industry follow a preliminary determination in an anti-dumping investigation launched in February. Officials say there is sufficient evidence that these imported products are being sold at unfairly low prices, threatening Malaysia's domestic industry. The temporary duties will come into force on Monday and remain in place for up to 120 days as the government completes its final phase of investigation. A final decision on permanent measures is expected by November 3rd. Now we move on to our next news. The Dalai Lama says he hopes to live beyond 130 years, extending his previous estimate by 2 decades. Speaking at a special prayer ceremony in Dharamsala ahead of his 90th birthday, the spiritual leader said he still has much to offer to the Buddhist faith and the Tibetan people. The Dalai Lama's remarks were met with applause from thousands of devotees who gathered from around the world to pray for his long life. He also reiterated that his reincarnation after his death would be decided by his own trust, not by China, which has insisted it should name his successor. Living in exile since 1959, the Nobel laureate continues to be a symbol of peace, compassion, and Tibetan identity. Despite Beijing's efforts to control the future of his legacy. Now we are joined by guest for this discussion, Madhav Nalapat. She's editorial director. He's editorial director of Sunday Guardian, all the way from New Delhi. Thank you, Madhav Nalapat, for joining us today. What impact does the Dalai Lama's long exile continue to have on the Tibetan identity and struggle for autonomy?
Look, the fact of the matter is that the Dalai Lama is the acknowledged spiritual leader of Tibet. His Holiness, the 14th Dalai Lama, Tenzin Gyatso, is the acknowledged spiritual guide for all the Tibetan people, despite the frankly, being out of of Tibet, out of the country since 1959, because he had to escape the Chinese arrest dragnet that had been issued against him. The fact is that the Potala Palace since then is not the spiritual home of the Tibetan community. The spiritual home is where the Dalai Lama stays, and he's now staying at the moment in India, or if he goes somewhere else, but he's staying at the moment in India. So the spiritual, if I may say so, the spiritual center of gravity of the Tibetan people and the Tibetan Buddhist faith is always where the Dalai Lama is. And he has set up a succession mechanism to ensure that the correct spiritual leader and not some imposter chosen by the Chinese for his pliability will be selected. And only this committee has the right to choose the real successor of His Holiness Tenzin Gyatso, the 14th Dalai Lama of Tibet, to choose the 15th Dalai Lama. So it's very, very significant, frankly, and he is extremely significant. He is the spiritual leader of the entire Tibetan community worldwide, including in Tibet, although many are now afraid to say his name or even have his photograph. Some people have his photograph clandestinely, and they'll be arrested and beaten up if authorities in China know they have the photograph. But the reality is the Chinese have not been able to stamp out Tibetan identity, and a good part of that reason is the presence of His Holiness Tenzin Gyatso, the 14th Dalai Lama, and therefore only the Dalai Lama chosen by his council of elders and advisors, which he has set up, only that Dalai Lama will have a transfer of authority from the 14th to the 15th, as and when that very sad day comes, I hope not soon, when His Holiness Tenzin Gyatso, the 14th Dalai Lama, is no longer with us.
And now, Madhav, I would also like to ask you questions from our previous news as well. If there was this news that Malaysia is now banning some things, and could other Southeastern Asian countries follow Malaysia's lead and impose similar anti-dumping measures, according to you?
Yes, in my view, it's very likely, for a simple reason that after decades of basically stealing the manufacturers, the manufacturing base of other countries, including primarily the United States, but also several other countries, including India to some extent. The fact is that there is now fight back by the democracies against this kind of flooding the markets with Chinese products that are artificially priced. Why do I say that? Because the cost of production is manipulated to meet a price that can basically sweep all foreign competition, including in the markets of the foreign competitors. The prices are all artificial, and the Communist Party enforces these prices on its own manufacturers through very rigid authoritarian ways. I mean, but for authoritarianism, it would not have been able to manage prices. People say that, that prices are determined by the costs of production. The fact is, in China, the costs of production are determined by the price needed to dump. So that situation is very much there. It's only going to continue. And so far as the countries that Malaysia has imposed duties on, they're all countries where Chinese manufacturers shifted and pretend to be the different countries, when the reality is that they're all basically Chinese companies operating under a different flag, under a different maybe brand name. So I think this is going to only continue, and it is a very welcome development, because it's time the world fights back against this kind of authoritarian grabbing of their manufacturing base. Thank you.
And Madhav, building on that, how might Malaysia's tough stance like this affect its trade ties with China and South Korea as well as Vietnam?
Look, the fact of the matter is that as far as Vietnam is concerned, it is a lot of Chinese manufacturers have already shifted to Vietnam. And as far as South Korea is concerned, there may be companies there that indulge in this or not. But the South Koreans have a mechanism through WTO and all that. And also they have very good bilateral relationship with Malaysia to sort out the problem. But the reality is that Vietnam is now being used by China to outsource several of its products. The products are Chinese in all but name and label. They're made in Vietnam by label, but actually they're all made in China. All components are Chinese and all the staff are Chinese. Only recently did, for example, Taiwanese companies who are employing large numbers of Chinese nationals remove the security threat. For example, 300 Chinese national threats because of this kind of restrictions now placed by Prime Minister Modi on China, whether directly manufacturing or indirectly through third countries.
Thank you very much, Madhav Nalawat, for joining us and sharing that insight. Now we move on to our next news. Turkey's political tensions are escalating as 3 more opposition mayors are arrested early today in what the main opposition party is calling a political operation. The mayors of Adana, Antalya, and Adiyaman, all from the Republican People's Party or JHP, were taken into custody over alleged graft and bribery. These latest arrests follow the removal and jailing of Istanbul's mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu in March, a key rival to President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and the JHP's frontrunner for the 2028 presidential race. The JHP, which swept local elections in 2024, says these moves are an attack on democratic mandates. Ankara Mayor Mansur Yavaş said the pro-Kurdish Dem Party have also condemned the arrests, warning that such actions undermine the rule of law and deepen divisions in society. Tensions continue to rise as Turkish courts also reopened a case this week targeting JHP leader Özgür Özel over vote-buying allegations, a move that could overturn his leadership. Now we move on to our next news. The BRICS summit in Rio de Janeiro is set to unfold without the usual leadership presence of China's President Xi Jinping, who is skipping the gathering for the first time in 12 years. Xi's absence alongside Russian President Vladimir Putin's remote participation due to his war crime charges has raised questions about the future dynamics within the bloc. Traditionally seen as a counterbalance to Western power, Xi's absence has sparked speculation, with experts suggesting it may be related to China's recent diplomatic engagement with Brazil's President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva for the rising prominence of Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who will be honored during this summit. With the BRICS facing growing economic pressures, especially from US tariffs, the summit represents a critical moment for the bloc. Brazil under Lula is pushing to elevate its global influence, hosting the G20, BRICS and COP30 talks ahead of national elections next year. In this context, Lula has also taken the opportunity to critique the austerity-driven economic model championed by Western powers, arguing it undermines the potential for sustainable growth in emerging economies like Brazil. Let us listen to what the Brazilian president had to say.
O modelo da austeridade é certo em nenhum país do mundo. A chamada austeridade exigida pelas instituições financeiras levaram os países a ficar mais pobres. Porque toda vez que se fala de austeridade, o pobre fica mais pobre e o rico fica mais rico.
Now we are joined for this discussion with Ross Feingold. He's a political analyst joining us live from Taipei. Thank you, Ross, for joining us today. Good to see you. What does Xi Jinping's absence mean for China's influence within the BRICS and the bloc's unity going forward?
A one-time absence probably does not mean a loss of influence for China. China is an important trading partner and/or an investor for many of the BRICS countries, including some of the new entrants to the BRICS or some of the observers that attend the BRICS meetings. So in the medium or long term, it probably won't have much of an impact on China's influence with BRICS countries or even around the world. Of course, President Lula da Silva is extremely disappointed. He's worked very hard to have a good relationship with China. He would have expected or assumed that Xi Jinping would have attended this summit in Brazil. So it definitely is a big loss for the prestige of this particular summit.
And building on that, now we see that India's Prime Minister Modi is welcomed in a significance. How could the rising profile of India's Prime Minister Modi shift this balance of power within BRICS, according to you?
Probably not, because the difference between India and China in this context is that China is a significant investor in some of these countries, whereas India is not. Some of these countries have good relations with both India and China, but the motivations are different. But when it comes to actually building projects, whether that's industrial projects or that's infrastructure projects, China is at the moment far ahead of India at doing that. So I think these countries, again, they would have liked to have seen Xi Jinping there. They're all disappointed, and the biggest disappointed leader, of course, is the host. But I think over the medium or the long term, it's not going to affect China's influence in the BRICS countries. So if it becomes a habit of Xi Jinping to skip the BRICS summit, then that's a different conversation to have going forward. But I think skipping one is probably not going to have too much of a detrimental impact on Xi Jinping or China's influence.
Thank you, Ross, for that insight. You will stay with us as we move on to our next topic. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, in a joint press conference with his French counterpart Jean-Noël Barrot in Paris on Friday, called for China and France to act as forces for stability, openness, inclusiveness, and unity. Wang emphasized the need for strategic communication to strengthening bilateral ties and contribute to global peace. He also addressed the importance of mutual cooperation in trade, cultural exchanges, and emerging technologies. Both ministers have agreed that in the current turbulent international landscape, major countries like China and France must take on greater responsibilities. Wang further highlighted the importance of multilateral coordination and reaffirmed the commitment to the United Nations' central role in global governance. Now we are back with Ross Feingold. Thank you, Ross, for staying with us. What opportunities and risks come with deeper cooperation in trade, culture, and emerging technologies between China and France?
One of the biggest challenges is that when you're dealing with China or Chinese companies, the Chinese companies are very much beholden to the central government and to the Communist Party of China. That's just the reality. So whether it's their investment decisions or what they do with data that they capture, if it's a Chinese company in the technology industry, there's legitimate concerns about doing business with Chinese companies and their close relationship with the central government or the Communist Party of China. However, the reality is in recent months, we do see European countries and companies with a more open mind towards doing business with China. Now, part of that may be motivated by the trade friction that now exists with the United States and European Union, prompted by President Trump's threat of higher tariffs. But the fact is, there's definitely a trend in recent months that Europe definitely seems more open to doing business with China.
Thank you, Ross, and you will stay with us as we move on to our next news. Senegalese Prime Minister Ousmane Sonko has praised China's technological advancements and called for stronger China-Africa cooperation in science and innovation. During his first official visit to China as Prime Minister, Sonko visited Hangzhou, Tianjin, and Beijing, meeting companies in the digital economy, new energy, smart logistics, and tech innovation sectors. Here's what the Senegalese Prime Minister said in an interview in China.
C'était extraordinaire d'avoir eu le privilège de visiter ça, de le vivre et de voir que ce qui se dit sur l'intelligence artificielle. Et bravo à la Chine, bravo aux inventeurs chinois, au monde scientifique de la Chine. Je suis quelqu'un qui croit fondamentalement à l'Afrique et je suis sûr que l'Afrique peut faire des progrès importants dans ce sens. Indépendamment de la faiblesse des moyens, nous avons de jeunes talents très prometteurs qui parviennent à suivre, à faire des choses dans l'intelligence artificielle. Et nous voulons que la collaboration entre la Chine et l'Afrique soit orientée vers cela également. Nous réitérons nos félicitations à la Chine pour ce qu'elle est en train de faire et qui rend fier tout le Sud global.
Sonko also discussed port development after visiting Tianjin, home to one of the world's most modern ports. He envisions Senegal becoming a strategic gateway for China in West Africa and across the continent. He praised China's ability to adapt high-tech progress to national needs while preserving its cultural identity, saying it offers lessons for the entire global South. Now we are joined back with our guest, Ross Feingold. He's a political analyst joining us live from Taipei. Thank you, Ross, for staying with us. Now, looking at this, how could stronger China-Africa tech ties benefit countries like Senegal, and what risks might come with it?
Certainly, countries in Africa could benefit from Chinese investment. And another way they benefit is China's willingness to give scholarships to African students to study in China, especially in the tech fields like engineering or computer science. So we often hear from the Western countries concerns about China's investments in Africa, causing African countries to be in a what they call a debt trap, where they owe a lot of money to China for infrastructure projects that don't make money. But on the other hand, we also have to keep in mind that there are examples of projects that African countries look at with China as being a win-win, and Chinese investment in infrastructure or their willingness to provide technology, mobile phone services, things like that, also helps their populations in the different African countries. So time and again, we see criticism from the West, but we also see time and again that African countries are willing to engage with China, to accept Chinese investment, and to maintain a very positive relationship with China. And that's something that the Western countries are probably very frustrated about, but they haven't been able to terminate.
Thank you, Ross, for sharing that insight as a political analyst and staying with us throughout the stories. Now we move on to our next news. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation has said that 2 American aid workers suffered non-life-threatening injuries in a targeted attack at a food distribution site in Gaza. The U.S. and Israeli-backed GHF said in a statement that the injured Americans were receiving medical treatment and were in a stable condition now. GHF said that, according to preliminary information, the attack was carried out by 2 assailants who threw 2 grenades. However, as per reports, it is not clear who was behind the attack. GHF also said that the incident occurred at the conclusion of an otherwise successful distribution in which thousands of Gazans safely received food. Meanwhile, Gaza's Civil Defense Agency has said that Israeli military operations killed 32 people across the Strip today. Earlier, Civil Defense spokesman Mahmoud Basal had specified that 5 of the dead were killed in a strike on a school in Gaza City. A second strike near another school in the city where displaced civilians had found shelter killed 3 people and wounded around 10, including children. Now we are joined by Ahmed Fatou. He's a spokesperson for the Fatah movement, joining us live from Ramallah. Thank you, Ahmed, for joining us today. Good to see you. How might this incident affect U.S. and Israeli support for the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation going forward?
Thank you for having me. In the first place, it should not be in Gaza, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. What should be is the international humanitarian institution from the UN to distribute aid to the Palestinian people, not by an institution that are run by mercenaries and has killed more than 600 Palestinians, aid seekers going to take some bags of food while receiving bullets and bombs. So Gaza Humanitarian Foundation has no right to speak about being a humanitarian foundation from the very first place. And second of all, they are accused of violating human rights, as has been reported by many entities, whether Palestinians or not Palestinians. So the last institution in this world that should be trusted is this despicable foundation that shoot at aid seekers, and as reported recently by one of their workers, has witnessed that they shoot Palestinian hungry population for fun. And that is the most despicable, the most evil act that I could ever see, could ever imagine in modern history.
Thank you, Ahmed, for sharing that insight. You will stay with us as we stay on this topic. Israel says it is still weighing its response to Hamas's positive reaction to the latest U.S.-sponsored ceasefire proposal for Gaza. According to local media, no decision has been made yet as top leaders continue to deliberate on the next steps. Israel's Security Cabinet is expected to meet later. This comes after Hamas signaled its willingness to engage with the ceasefire framework, which has been mediated by the U.S., Qatar, and Egypt. Meanwhile, violence continues. According to Gaza's civil defense, at least 32 Palestinians have been killed in Israeli airstrikes on multiple areas of the Gaza Strip today. Now we go back to our guest discussion with Ahmed Fatou. He's a spokesperson for the Fatah movement. Ahmed, thank you for staying with us. How credible is Hamas's willingness to engage with this U.S.-backed framework, given the continuing violence on the ground and maybe trust issues between both?
Well, Hamas responded positively to the Witkoff proposal. We all witnessed that Israel is the one that's bombing and shooting at Palestinian people and targeting civilians. They just target, as you have reported, refugee camps, schools, hospitals. That it continues for the past 21 months. So Israel needs to stop these atrocities and these crimes to go for peace, because peace cannot take place under fire and under the point of the gun. Hamas did respond positively, as reported. What we fear, and we in Fatah Move also are in support of this ceasefire deal, because Gaza is bleeding heavily, and we support immediate ceasefire and the full retreatment of Israeli occupation forces from Gaza and the West Bank. Now, we fear as Palestinians that Israel will not respect the ceasefire deal, because they have done it just in last February, when they did not continue to phase 2 of the previous ceasefire deal. And now we feel the same. There is no guarantees for Israel to stop, especially that the extremist far-right Israeli government is announcing and proclaiming clear for everyone that they aim to continue this war and to just ethnically cleanse the Palestinian people and fully occupy Gaza, or 70% of Gaza, and they want also to annex the West Bank. So we are facing a regime that does not even recognize the Palestinian right to existence or the Palestinian state in opposition to the entire world and the international law. So we really need a guarantee from the United States and the international community from Israel not to proceed into massive war after 60 days from the ceasefire. We also need to touch the major political settlement of the question of Palestine, which is the two-state solution. This ceasefire should be followed immediately by an international peace conference that settled this occupation, for real, and for Israel to stop its aggression against the Palestinian people and its persecution of the Palestinian people for the past 77 years. Otherwise, we are in the midst of a very dangerous and extremist situation that could renew its aggression against the Palestinian people, especially that they did not receive until today any real accountability or sanctions for their crimes against humanity that we witness every day for the past 21 months on top of the 77 years of brutal and cruel occupation.
Thank you, Ahmed, for staying with us and sharing that insight. Now we move on to our next news. Multiple reports state that the European Union is considering a range of sanctions against Israel over its military operations in Gaza. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas is expected to unveil an options paper next week, outlining possible measures including sanctions on Israeli officials, a partial suspension of the EU-Israel Association Agreement, trade restrictions, and even an arms embargo. The document will be presented to EU ambassadors, with foreign ministers set to debate the options on July 15th, the same day Israel is expected to report on humanitarian improvements in Gaza. Any move to suspend the association agreement would require unanimous backing from all EU members, making it unlikely. The EU's internal review has already found signs of human rights breaches by Israel, but deep divisions among member states may mean only limited sanctions on individuals moving forward. Now we move on to our next news. Israel has condemned the attacks on a synagogue and an Israeli restaurant in Melbourne as acts of anti-Semitic terrorism. The Israeli government is calling on Australian authorities to bring the perpetrators to justice. Deputy Foreign Minister Sharon Haskell condemned the horrifying attacks on a synagogue and an Israeli business in Melbourne, calling them a shocking reminder of the growing racist anti-Semitic hate crimes in Australia. She further described the targeting of Jewish places of worship and an Israeli restaurant as terrorism aimed at intimidating an entire community simply because their religion and identity. Haskell called for strict action against those inciting hate and violence, warning that weakness and silence only fuel extremism. She asserted that there is no justification for attacks on Jews, Israelis, or any minorities. This attack comes 7 months after a similar incident where another synagogue in Melbourne was targeted, resulting in 1 injury and extensive damage. Victoria Premier has condemned the attack as absolutely appalling, stating that any attack on a place of worship is an act of hate, and an attack on a Jewish place of worship is a clear act of anti-Semitism. Victoria's Police Acting Commander Zorka Dunstan and Melbourne Lord Mayor Nicholas Rees shared their statements. Let's listen in.
I'd like to make it very clear that we do recognise that these crimes are disgusting and abhorrent, but at this stage we are not declaring this a terrorist incident.
These criminal acts against a Melbourne synagogue and an Israeli business are absolutely shocking, and as Lord Mayor, I condemn them in the strongest possible terms. Every Melburnian has the right to enjoy simple acts like enjoying a meal, visiting your place of worship, without being subject to vile and dangerous attacks.
Now we're joined by Ahmed Fatou. He's a spokesperson for the Fatah movement. Thank you, Ahmed, for staying with us. What does this attack reveal about the state of anti-Semitism and hate crimes in Australia today, as we usually think of Australia being a very peaceful or maybe multicultural country?
Of course, attack against any religious group is extremely disgusting and refused. The Palestinian struggle is against occupation irrelative to its identity, whether they are Jewish people or non-Jewish people, or even if they were Muslims, it's against an occupation. So people need to realize that don't relate these attacks of anti-Semitism to the Palestinian cause. That has nothing to do with it, because actually one of among the most prominent advocates for the Palestinian liberation cause are Jewish people, and we have seen that in Washington, London, and even within the Fatah movement, my party, we have Uri Davis, who is a Jewish Israeli who is against Zionism and with the liberation of the Palestinian people, and is part of our party and a senior member actually. So we have to distinguish between the attacks against religion, which is refused, against the law, against our moral ethics, against our very ideologies in fighting occupation and persecution. We refuse the persecution against any religious group or any community in this world, or any ethnic group. We all call for peace and equality among people, and on top of them, the Palestinian people are suffering for the past 77 years, not enjoying equal rights with Israeli citizens who are unfortunately presenting an apartheid system that distinguish and discriminate against the Palestinian people and the non-Jewish community. So I hope they don't relate these individual attacks against targeting the Jewish people to the Palestinian cause. That has nothing to do with it. I also call for the Australian government to take all the measures to protect all the ethnic and religious group in their country, whether they are Jewish, Muslim, Christians, Buddhists, Hindus, anyone, because freedom of speech and freedom of expression should be respected. And we hope that they also pressure Israel to respect these same principles.
Thank you very much, Ahmed, for staying with us. You will stay with us as we move on to our next news. In a recent statement, Sheikh Naim Qassem, the Secretary General of Hezbollah, strongly rejected calls for the disarmament of his group by the Lebanese government. He emphasized that Hezbollah would never surrender, underscoring the group's commitment to defending Lebanon's sovereignty. Qassem criticized the Lebanese parties pushing for disarmament, urging them to first call for the withdrawal of occupation forces from Lebanon's territory. In his speech during the Ashura commemoration, Qassem reiterated Hezbollah's dedication to Lebanon, emphasizing that true patriotism is rooted in defending the land and upholding its dignity. He also discussed the role of Islam in supporting both men and women in defending the nation. Furthermore, Qassem reflected on Hezbollah's historical commitment to the Palestinian cause, recalling past sacrifices made, including the death of figures like Sayyid Abbas al-Musawi and Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah. He ended it with a message of resilience to Hezbollah supporters, urging them to remain steadfast in the face of adversity. Now we go back to our guest discussion with Ahmed Fatou. Thank you, Ahmed, for staying with us. Now we see that Hezbollah has answered, and how much leverage does the Lebanese government really have to push for Hezbollah's disarmament?
Well, it is a matter for the Lebanese people to discuss and for the Lebanese government to discuss. We in Palestine, of course, support Lebanon's sovereignty and unity, and we reject the bombardment of Lebanese and the Lebanon cities by the Israeli occupation forces that does not respect their neighbors. And they are bombing not only Lebanon, they are bombing Syria, and they went to the extent to invade Syria and arrest 3 Syrian people. So we are facing a regime that does not respect his neighbor, does not respect international law, does not respect the human rights, and look at the Arabs and Muslims as subhuman beings that they want to colonize and expand their colonial regime further. We hope the Lebanese people will be united. We support their unity, their sovereignty, and their progress. They are our brothers, our sisters. We stand by them. We have thousands, hundreds of thousands of Palestinian refugees in Lebanon, and we are looking to improve their situation there, and until one day they will practice their right of return to their occupied territories, Palestine, that they were expelled from in 1948. So we hope the Palestinian political powers would find a way to unite their forces and unite their political vision into one Lebanese government, one Lebanese country, and one Lebanese army that should stand united against the Israeli aggression and invasion periodically against the Lebanese country.
Thank you, Ahmed, for staying with us and sharing your expertise as a spokesperson for the Fatah movement. Now we move on to our next news. Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has reaffirmed his country's unwavering support for Iran's sovereignty and territorial integrity. He made the commitment during a meeting with Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian on the sidelines of the Economic Cooperation Organization summit in Khan-Kendi, Azerbaijan. During their meeting, both leaders expressed satisfaction over the progress made since their last talks and discussed regional developments, including Israel's 12-day war of aggression against Iran. Sharif praised Tehran's role in reaching a ceasefire and reiterated Islamabad's solidarity with Iran, stressing a commitment to peace through dialogue and diplomacy. President Pezeshkian thanked Prime Minister Sharif for Pakistan's consistent diplomatic support, particularly during the recent Israel-Iran crisis, and recognized Islamabad's crucial role in international forums to diffuse tensions. These two leaders vowed to deepen cooperation in various sectors while jointly advocating for regional stability. Sharif also conveyed a message of congratulations and best wishes to Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei. Now we are moving on to our next news. Paris has opened up the river Seine for public swimming for the first time in over a century, with dozens of people seen eagerly wading into the long, polluted waterway. Paris Mayor Anne Hidalgo and France's Sports Minister Marie Barsac greeted swimmers at the site, one of 3 designated swimming areas alongside the Seine. The pair were later seen filling bottles with water from the river before holding them up for the cameras. Bathing in the Seine had been banned since 1923, with promises to restore water quality going back to 1990s, when then Paris Mayor Jacques Chirac, later French president, vowed to make the river safe for swimming again. France has spent at least $1.6 billion turning a river frequently laden with sewage into one clean enough to swim in. Paris officials say they have taken several measures to ensure swimmers can safely enjoy the long-anticipated reopening, including daily water pollution testing and implementing a swim test for bathers. Olympic events were held last year in the Seine, and Paris hopes holding outdoor swimming events in the waterway will demonstrate its transformation to global audience. Now we move on to our next news. Wildfires on the Greek island of Crete have forced the evacuation of thousands as gale force winds and scorching heat hinder containment efforts. Blazes that began near Ierapetra have destroyed forests, olive groves, and farmland, with firefighters battling flames and dangerously dry conditions. The fires have also raised concerns about tourism in Athens. Flames threatened residential areas including Koropi and Pikermi, prompting emergency evacuation of over 1,000 people. Power outages and structural damage were reported as hundreds of firefighters and aerial units fought to contain the blazes. More than 230 firefighters have been deployed across Crete alone, supported by multiple helicopters and vehicles in around-the-clock operations. Here's what a firefighter from Greece had to say.
Ανταποκριθήκαμε άμεσα να έρθουμε να βοηθήσουμε στην πυρκαγιά. Η πυρκαγιά ξεκινήσαμε εμείς από κάτω να απειλούσαμε κατοικίες. Γρήγορα κάναμε ενέργειες ώστε να εξασφαλίσουμε να μην κάνουν οι κατοικίες. Συνεχίσαμε μετά στο βουνό να κάνουμε κατάσβεση. Τώρα αυτή τη στιγμή έχουμε έρθει πάνω εδώ. Υπήρχε ένα σπίτι που το απειλούσαν οι φλόγες. Με τη ρήψη των εναερίων μέσων έχει κοπεί κάπως η πυρκαγιά.
Temperatures across Greece have soared to 38 degrees Celsius, with authorities warning of an extremely high risk of new fires. The blazes have destroyed homes and infrastructure, while animals have also been lost. Officials continue to monitor conditions closely as the country struggles to contain multiple outbreaks amid an intense early summer heat wave. Now let us take a look at some stories from the world of sports. Lewis Hamilton says Ferrari can definitely dream of a strong result after a positive Friday at the British Grand Prix. Ferrari finished both practice sessions in the top 3, close behind McLaren's Lando Norris, who led the second session. Hamilton, who led the first practice session, acknowledged Ferrari's upgrade and said he now feels more in sync with his car ahead of potentially rainy weekend. Charles Leclerc also reported good race pace, but says the team needs to find more speed in qualifying to change McLaren. Chelsea are through to the Club World Cup semi-finals after a dramatic 2-1 win over Palmeiras in Philadelphia. The winning goal came in the 83rd minute when Malo Gusto's cross deflected off Augustin Giai and goalkeeper Weverton for a late own goal. Cole Palmer opened the scoring early, but 18-year-old Estevão Willian, who is set to join Chelsea, struck back with a stunning equalizer. Chelsea will face Fluminense in the semi-final on Tuesday, though Liam Delap and Levi Colwill will miss out due to suspension. Fine Smith starts at fly half for the Lions against the Waratahs in Sydney, looking to stake his claim as Finn Russell's test backup. His sharp cameo against the Reds impressed legends Dan Biggar and Ronan O'Gara, praising his composure and game control. With Owen Farrell back in the squad but yet to feature, Saturday's clash could be crucial in the fly half selection battle. Emma Raducanu says she takes heart from Arina Sabalenka's praise and top 10 prediction, but admits she still needs to improve. The British number 1 lost 7-6, 6-4 to the world number 1 in a tight Wimbledon third-round battle, having led in both sets. Sabalenka called Raducanu's level incredible and said she had to fight like crazy to win. Raducanu said the performance gives her confidence, but insists she must keep working to close the gap and finish stronger in big movements. England's Test cricket setup looks very different from the one that suffered a 4-1 defeat in India last winter. The aftershocks of that series saw big names dropped, including record wicket taker James Anderson, who retired after an emotional farewell at Lord's. Wicket keeper Ben Foakes, praised as one of the best glove men in the game, was also axed making way for Jamie Smith. And Smith, who has delivered picked for his counter-racting batting, he made an impact at number 7, quitting those who questioned Folker's ouster. Also missing from the side since the India tour, Ollie Robinson and Johnny Bairstow. As England resets for a new era, the selection gambles appear to be paying off. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring more news updates from around the world.